There is no shortage of terrifying creatures and cosmic horrors in the Fear and Hunger franchise. However, one underrated piece of Fear and Hunger lore is the fate that befalls those who shows love between each other in the name of the old god Sylvian and engage in a ritual called marriage. The process of marriage creates a fusion of both souls, which results in volatile outcomes, either creating a new, stronger person by fusing the two participants together, or the two participants get transformed into an abomination of the human form, a fate worse than death. In this video, we will delve into the dark reality of marriage in Fear and Hunger. But before we get into this, I'd like to say a thank you to those who helped me reach 1k subscribers. It really means a lot if you guys drop a like and sub, as it helps me make more videos like this. So with that out of the way, let's look into the twisted reality of marriage. When stepping foot into the dungeon of Fear and Hunger, you will encounter references, statues, and books detailing an old god named Sylvian. Sylvian is spoken to be the deity representing concepts such as love, fertility, and creation. It is said that both man and woman were created by Sylvian and are made in her image. She commanded an entity known as Vitruvia to draw the design of humans. As to who Vitruvia really is, we don't have too much info other than this is a designer of some sort. That being said, Sylvian loved the design of mankind so much as it resembled her. She followed through with this design and created mankind, literally giving birth to humanity, which is where Sylvian got the moniker of being the god of creation. This reputation as the god of creation is counteracted by another old god named Grogoroth, who parallels the concept of creation with destruction. And as much as these two gods represent opposite concepts, they are entirely necessary for each other to exist. As creation requires destruction, like a tree matures in life and lays seeds in the ground before dying, thus creating new trees as the original tree gets destroyed, and so on and so forth. It is this process of creation and destruction which keeps reality and nature in check, and this is why Sylvian cannot necessarily be considered good, and Grogoroth can't necessarily be considered evil. The two concepts that they represent are necessary for the stability of reality as we know it. Sylvian encourages mortals to make love and create more in her name. However, this love is up to interpretation and can take a very twisted form. The ultimate embodiment of this expression of love between two mortals in the name of Sylvian is known as marriage. But not the traditional marriage that we would understand it in the real world, but in the context of Fear and Hunger, this marriage ritual is literally a fusion of two or more bodies into one entity. The player of Fear and Hunger can encounter various ritual circles, and by selecting the option Show Love, the player can make love with a member of their party, and doing this in the name of Sylvian can give you affinity with her. By performing this action, the two participants cement their love in front of Sylvian and gain her favor, rewarding them by fusing and intertwining their bodies into one. This successful marriage creates a character who is more robust and even stronger in combat. It also removes any physical injury present in either participant. Say if you have a limb missing or both participants have limbs missing, by performing a marriage, it creates a body with all limbs attached and no injuries. It also removes any mental disorders present in either participants, with all individual neuroses and phobias getting nullified after the process. This process of marriage is literally a fusion of both parties. The marriage can also use the skills and abilities from both souls. Now, you would be forgiven in thinking that this process of marriage actually sounds very good, as the upsides are quite significant. However, one only has to think about this for a moment to realize that it literally removes the individuality of both participants, in the most literal sense, with body and mind becoming one, your thoughts becoming your partner's thoughts and vice versa. So as tempting as it is to have the physical benefits of marriage, it comes at the cost of individuality. Players can encounter various examples of successful marriages throughout the game, and I use the term successful here loosely. One example of a successful marriage is the Moonless Guard, a marriage between a guard and a cave wolf. Yes, a cave wolf, creating this abomination with a gaping maw spawning vertically across the entirety of its body. There is also a marriage between a yellow mage and a lizard man, creating this hunched monstrosity with an elongated neck that is somehow still wearing clothes. It's quite clear that Sylvian is quite liberal with what can be considered a participant for marriage, with gender or even species being viable options. However, there are limits as to what can be considered a participant to marriage. One example of someone that can't participate in a marriage is a skeleton, as skeletons don't have flesh and thus cannot perform the ritual. So it seems like if something has flesh, it can engage in marriage, and that is pretty much the primary requirement. Now the question is, what would compel people to transform into these beings? Well, the horror of the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger creates such an oppressive and dangerous situation that it's understandable as to why two beings would be desperate enough to forego their individuality and bodies for the sake of having better chances to make it out alive and escape the terrifying cosmic horrors of the dungeon. Desperate times call for desperate measures, as they say. However, if one delves too deep into marriage, and a marriage entity performs another marriage after it, the user will become an abominable marriage, twisting and mutating flesh beyond recognition, with tumors and alien growths sprouting and distorting the human form. One can perform a marriage ritual once, but if they do it another time, then you become this alien abomination. Now, throughout this video, I've been referring to marriages as successful marriages. So what does it mean to have an unsuccessful marriage? In the game, a failed marriage occurs in a very particular way. Instead of making love and then a successful marriage coming out of it, the player will merge and melt, twisting limbs and flesh into a mass of oozing flesh and melted skin. This is a failed marriage, and marks the end as the player can no longer move or perform any regular function beyond just lying there in pain. It will mark the end of that player as the failed marriage lies wheezing and oozing fluids onto the floor until its last moments. An example of a failed marriage that you can encounter in Fear and Hunger is in the thicket between Buckman and Sir Seymour, two travellers that ventured into the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger that you encountered during the early game, but now lay as a pitiful creature, wheezing and struggling to breathe. Talking to this failed marriage, it lets out a gasp, saying, "We delved too deep," only to be left writhing in a twisted form beyond sanity. This is very much up to interpretation as to why this is the case. One could interpret this as Sylvian truly quote-unquote blessing the participants, with Sylvian fully embracing her children into a form which is grotesque and terrifying to us mortals, but these failed marriages may be seen as beautiful or a good thing by Sylvian, who might have a mind that is very different and incomprehensible to us. So we may see a failed marriage as a terrifying outcome, but to Sylvian, this may be her being nice. She might see this as a favourable outcome that us mortals can't comprehend the beauty of. There is one other form of marriage which I have yet to talk about, and that is the human Hydra. In Fear and Hunger, a human Hydra can be encountered by the player who steps foot into a ritual chamber in the dungeon, only to be greeted by a truly appalling sight, a giant mass of human bodies twisted and fused into each other in a blob-like shape, comprising of individual faces and bodies screaming obscenities at the player. This harrowing sight is what is known as a human Hydra, a marriage that has taken place by a large group of people, only to be fused into a blob of incomprehensible agony. It is rumoured that this human Hydra was a ritual commenced by a group of travellers who came face to face with the horrors of the Dungeon of Fear and Hunger, only to quickly realise that they're in way over their head, and thus became desperate to find some way out and look for some power they can obtain. So in their desperate situation, they turn to Sylvian to ascend to a more powerful form, engaging in the marriage ceremony. However, things would not go as planned. Reality reality would come crashing down on them as each individual has their limbs bent, broken, and fused into the other participants in a maddening form, unable to move or interact with the world, with each participant being entirely stuck in the ritual chamber used on top of each other. It's worth mentioning that these are just people in a desperate situation that try to find some way out, and turn to the old god Sylvian just for some off chance that they could have their pain alleviated and maybe escape from the dungeon, only to seal their fate in one of the most excruciatingly painful ways possible. It's clear that showing love in the name of Sylvian is a dangerous prospect. There's also another noteworthy human Hydra that can be encountered in Fear and Hunger 2. You can encounter an enemy named Platoon, which acts as a human tank designed by the Bremen Empire, having flesh melded together with tank-like armor and a cannon attached to it, likely the result of some kind of scientific experiment conducted by the Bremen Empire, who are quite well known for experimenting with human biology and creating bioweapons, taking the human Hydra design that we see in Fear and Hunger 1 and turning it into a sentient biomechanical weapon, wreaking havoc and destruction upon their enemies in a mindless form that can only destroy that which is in front of it. Marriage in Fear and Hunger is a terrifying concept. However, the name marriage is a curious choice. An on-the-nose analysis would be that the marriage ritual is a metaphor for marriage itself, as in marriage in the real world. A successful marriage has two lovers come together and commit to be part of each other, to complement each other's weaknesses and really add to each other's success, thus becoming a stronger unit. This is the idealized concept of marriage, yet on the other hand, marriage can go horribly wrong, literally ruining each other's lives and twisting each other into the worst possible version of themselves. Just like how marriage can go really well or really bad in real life, so too is this the case of the marriage ritual in Fear and Hunger. You'll either become a stronger version of yourself or be condemned to a life of suffering. And if you want to find out more about the other gods in Fear and Hunger and how they operate, you can check out this video I made about the obscure sulfur god in Fear and Hunger 2.